Good morning, everybody. Here we are in Auroville, Needam Guest House 32. My name is Luca. I'm a white and old Aurovillian, matrimonial coordinator and so. With us we have AMRIT over, that is more old Aurovillian than me. And he has been having quite a life in search of spirituality that he eventually found in Auroville here with us. And we would like to today have a session about Sri Aurobindo Yoga in the light of traditional yogas. Now, I will leave you now with Amrit that will tell in detail what has been his experience and his relation with Auroville. You're very welcome. So, Amrit, you can tell something about yourself and the life and your relation with Auroville?
Yes, at least materially, externally, the connection with Auroville actually started in 1967 in January. At that time, the head of Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Delhi, the Delhi branch, he called me and he said the mother is starting a new project called Auroville, and will you become the representative, Japanese representative, to put the soil in the urn for that ceremony, foundation ceremony? And I said yes, of course. At that time I knew nothing about Auroville. And then what happened was, it was in February 1968, and he called me and he said, you don't have to come because we found a real one. That means a real Japanese, because I'm not a Japanese citizen. I'm Japanese origin but not a citizen. So he said, we found a real one, so you don't have to come. So I missed the foundation ceremony, but came to Pondicherry late in 1968. And that's when I first came to Auroville. And of course at that time there was nothing here. I mean, as far as I could tell, there were almost no people, no buildings.
But in your background, you were born in Japan and...
No, I was born in the US at that time. My parents had immigrated to the US from Japan. I mean, my father was actually born in America. He was a US citizen. My mother immigrated from Japan to the US. And during the war, all the Japanese, most of them were actually American citizens. They were interned in concentration camps. So I was born in one of these camps. And this actually relates to certain experiences even in Auroville much later. But so this experience of being born in the camps actually had a very profound impact on me, and I wanted to understand why such things can happen. And I guess that also was one of the factors that sort of impelled my search spiritually, is because of these experiences.
But you were born in a Buddhist family.
Yes, my family was Buddhist. There were two Buddhist, you can say, lines. One was, my parents were part of a devotional Buddhist sect called Jodo Shinshu, which is the Pure Land sect. It's a devotional sect. And my grandfather was the Zen sect. And so, because of, one thing, frankly, they were not overtly religious, but they had absorbed the spirit of Buddhism. And one thing that I always, like the Dalai Lama said, that my religion is a religion of kindness. And I can say that this is how my parents were. They lived this life, and mostly I never saw them fight, I never saw them argue, I never saw them being aggressive. In fact, they were always uniformly kind, and what I felt was that they had absorbed this Buddhist spirit, even though they were not overtly religious. So, this also had a great impact on me. And later in life, actually, I came into contact with a Buddhist Roshi, Suzuki Roshi, in San Francisco, and this is what even sort of, how do you say, it fortified my aspiration for spiritual things, because for the first time I saw what I felt to be a truly spiritual person. He was very gentle, very kind, and he had a tremendous knowledge, inner knowledge, I felt. And it was something that, I guess it was something that moved me deeply, because I had never met a person like this. And he wanted me to become a monk. And he wanted basically me to enter his monastery, which was called Eiheiji in Japan, and then come back to work with him. So I definitely was considering this. So I went to study on a scholarship from Stanford. It was called a Rockefeller Scholarship, up to my doctorate. And that was certainly a possibility to study Buddhism. And in fact, while I was there in Japan, I did live at a branch of his monastery in Tokyo, and then later entered another Zen Buddhist monastery in Kobe. And this was also a very interesting experience. Now, I would say that there was some other kind of what I would call behind all of this. There was a kind of, I don't know what you would call it, experience that happened when I was about 12 years old, and that I felt was actually guiding me through all these things. I didn't know what it was. Later, when I came to India, this experience again started again, and I came to understand that it was what people call the mother's force. It was very concrete, and it's a conscious force. And I felt it was this force that was taking me through all these experiences, that took me to Japan, that brought me to India, and finally to the ashram. And through all these things, it brought me into contact with different forms of yoga. Like first was the Buddhist, and then in North India with certain teachers there.
So you came to India at the age of?
I came to India at the age of 23.
By yourself?
Yeah, by myself.
As a searcher?
And I felt something was pushing me to India, but I didn't understand what it was. Because really frankly, I had no interest at all in India. I was not familiar with Hinduism, with Indian yogas, with Indian meditation. I was only familiar with the Buddhist aspect. And the last thing that I would have thought about is coming to India. And yet this is what happened. I had no intention to stay here more than a very short time, like maybe a few months, and then return to Japan. But it didn't work out here that way, and instead I stayed continuously here for 17, 18 years, and then finally returned after that to America. But it is here, of course, that I came into contact with Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And it was then I realized that this force that I had experienced as a child was actually the force of the Mother, and that it was guiding me through all these things to come to India and finally to Pondicherry. And this is where Auroville also comes in. In North India, when I first came into contact with a disciple of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, he was also a disciple of another guru called Swami Shardanand. Swami Shardanand was rumored to be one of actually there was a great freedom fighter in India called Subhash Chandra Bose. So this man, Baba Shardanand, was rumored to be this man, Subhash Chandra Bose. I mean, Indians know very well about it. Whether that's true or not, I cannot say. I met Baba Shardanand, and he does seem to have some resemblance, both in personality, age, and so on, with Subhash Bose. But aside from that, he was also a disciple of the Mother, and he was speaking with Mukherjee about what was very similar to Auroville. He was talking about the gathering together of people from all countries who would be conduits for the force of the Mother to help humanity avert a disaster. And it was very funny because this was in 1967, just prior to the formation of Auroville. And when I came to Auroville, I was thinking, but this is exactly what they were talking about. So these are very strange things that often happen in India, but this idea about Auroville, they were already talking about before Auroville started. So, and then I remember on our first trip here in 1960, I think it was 1968, I remember the person who was guiding us turned to me. I was at that time in Pondicherry in the ashram. He said to me, "This is your place, you belong here. You have to stay here." And of course I had no idea and I had no desire particularly to stay here. But that's exactly what happened. Whether I liked it or not.
But you've been traveling some ashram, you were in the Muktananda ashram for quite some time in the north also?
Well, I've been in different contact with different teachers. When I first came to India, it was a person called Mahesh Yogi who was the progenitor of transcendental meditation. But I didn't really feel comfortable there. And that's after him, that's when I came into contact with Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And I was told by the person who I came into contact with that his guru, who was this Baba Shardanand, had directed him to come to Rishikesh, where he would meet a group of foreigners, and Mukherjee should instruct us in the yoga of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. And that's exactly what happened. Now, why it happened like that, I cannot say, but that's what he told me. And so all the instructions we received from this man, his name was Mukherjee, was only about Mother and Sri Aurobindo and their yoga. And I remember I had written a letter to Mother. This was in 1960. I think it was 1968. And I wrote to Mother and I said, Mother, I feel your presence and your love, but I do not know who you are. And it's very strange because about a couple of weeks after, I felt Mother's force very strongly, and she spoke and she said, yes, you will know who I am. One day you will know who I am. And she said some other things which actually came true. Exactly 9 years from that date, it happened, what she said. Anyway, these were contacts with the Mother previous to coming here. And it actually started when I was very young, at 12 years old. And at the time, of course, I had no idea about all these things. So I used to feel someone was guiding me. And I called her my grandmother. I said, my grandmother is guiding me. But I didn't realize how close to the truth I was. That the grandmother that I thought was guiding me was actually the mother. And but I really felt this. I felt something was averting disaster. There were several times when I felt there would be a disaster and I couldn't survive. And then I was pulled out of it, like something came and just pulled me out. And I realized it was the mother. And this happened so many times. It happened in Auroville also. So many times, different groups of people have tried to cancel my visa. And I remember at one point, Mother simply said to me, be quiet. So I just was quiet and it worked out. I would say 3 or 4 times there have been attempts to make me leave India, to cancel my visa by different groups, by the Indian government, by society, by Aurovillians, by and it can go on like that. But it has never worked because Mother also, she simply said, be quiet, it will work out, it's okay. And it always happened that way. And each time, I would say each of these 4 times, she saved me. So, in fact, her message in the first time when my visa was being threatened, she said in a message from Pavitra, who was her secretary, have trust that in the end, everything will work out for the good of your soul and the fulfillment of your spiritual destiny. In other words, have trust, have faith, don't worry, everything will work out. And it always has. You know, sometimes I felt the situation was a disaster, that I couldn't survive it, and yet it always worked out. Even in Auroville, there were a number of times when the situation was quite dangerous here, and it worked out. So, this is one thing that I wanted to clarify. You know, it has to do with the old yogas, and it has to do also with the mother's force. There are different ways. You know, Sri Aurobindo once said, our yoga begins where the old yogas end. Now, there have been 2 interpretations of this statement by Sri Aurobindo. The one that is commonly held by most people, especially devotees of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, is that Sri Aurobindo's yoga goes beyond the old yogas and therefore is superior. It has actually gone a step further than the old yogas, and therefore it has, the old yogas are not necessary anymore. The second interpretation is that first you fulfill the realizations of the old yogas. And on that basis, Sri Aurobilo's yoga begins. Now, I would say that most people, even in Auroville or even in the ashram, have taken the first interpretation that Sri Aurobilo's yoga transcends the old yogas and the old yogas are no longer necessary. But this is not what Mother has said. Mother has taken more the second interpretation.
So when you speak about the begin with the other end, we actually refer to self-realization.
What is that?
We refer to self-realization according also to the synthesis of the yoga and their teaching. So we talk about self-realization as the base of Sri Aurobilo's yoga.
Because Mother was very clear about this. She said that people tend to take the end first rather than the beginning. She said when people say that they are transforming, they're doing Sri Aurobilo's yoga, they're transforming themselves, they're trying to realize the supermento and so on. And she said this is not the correct approach. She said unless you realize yourself as a basis, only then can you do Sri Aurobilo's yoga. She was very clear about this. She said to talk about supermental and transformation when you don't even realize the basic things with which you can understand their yoga. He said it's childishness. So she was very clear about this. It is only on the basis of self-realization, which is the aim of the old yogas, that you can begin their yoga. And this is the second interpretation of that statement by Sri Aurobindo. Our yoga begins where the old yogas end. So, Mother was, and Sri Aurobindo also, he said very clearly, the main thing in the beginning is to realize your soul by whatever means. In other words, it doesn't matter how you get there. The main thing is getting there, and then you can do his yoga. Otherwise, you don't understand anything of what his yoga means, what transformation means, what the supermental means. So that basic realization, what Mother is saying is that most older yogas, they stop there. But she said, that is not where you stop, it's where you begin. So you have to first realize that. And then you can use it as like a stepping stone to Sri Aurobilo's yoga. She was very clear about that. And even if you take Sri Aurobindo himself, before he formulated his yoga of transformation, he had all the realizations of the old yogas. When he first stepped, what he said was that before coming to India, he didn't have much spiritual experiences. As soon as he stepped onto Indian soil, it started. And his realization of the self, of the Supreme Brahma, actually began with his contact with Lele, this great Advaita yogi. And he realized in 3 days what Lele took, I think, a long time, years to realize. So that's why Lele thought, he said, you're crazy. How can you do in 3 days?
That was the still mind, the experience, the realization of the still mind.
I think it was not just the still mind. The still mind is only part of that. The realization of the Supreme Brahma is
self-realization then. You think
self-realization, basically, yes. It's what they call turiya in the old yogas. There are different terminologies for this, but Sri Aurobindo realized this within 3 days, which is, it's very quick. Most people take their whole lives. and and then he went to various experiences, and his final when he started the ashram, it was his realization of Krishna, the descent of Krishna in what he called into the subtle physical. Now, during this time, also during this whole period, Sri Aurobindo was writing a lot. And if you take his writings, they're all writings that are the basis of India's spiritual tradition and culture. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and the different paths of yoga, like as he describes in the synthesis of yoga. So there's no question of Sri Aurobindo's intimate connection with Indian tradition, spiritual tradition, and Indian yogas.
So you say he went right away through the two main realization, that is one, the Brahma realization, and Advaita realization of the reality,
yes,
or maybe even the ultimate reality, and one is the Krishna, that is the realization of the heart, what we call psychic being in terminology of Sri Aurobindo Yoga. So he went through the very classic first.
In a way he did, yes, I think so. And both in terms of his experiences and in terms of his writings, he went through the whole gamut of Indian yoga. Now this is something that's very interesting, Mother said. She said normally to follow a yogic discipline in India, it takes a long time. Years and years and years of practice, of discipline, of many experiences. But she said there is a state of consciousness in which you can very rapidly go through all of these yogas very quickly. But it's a particular state of consciousness. And in a certain way, I think this is what Sri Aurobindo did. And evidently Mother knew about it because, and most likely she also participated in this because she would not know about this unless she experienced it. You see, that was one thing about Mother. She talked mostly about things she experienced. And this is what is very important in Auroville, is this experience of the Mother's presence and the force. Now, the main thing, for example, you have the Mata Mandir. What does the Mata Mandir represent? The Mata Mandir represents basically the essence of Sri Aurobindo's yoga. The main thing in the Mata Mandir is the crystal. Now, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the triple transformation. This is also where the traditional realizations also come in. In the beginning, when Sri Aurobindo, before he started the ashram, many of the disciples had many experiences. But Sri Aurobindo and the Mother stopped it. Because what they said is that with all the disciples having all these experiences, it would start another religion which would hold humanity for another 1,000 years. But this is not what they wanted. What they wanted is more of a change. Okay. So that was when they started the ashram. And they formulated their yoga. Before they started the ashram, their main point of concentration for Sri Aurobindo was actually in the center of the forehead. But Sri Aurobindo said he realized that this could not lead to transformation. He finally said the only thing that can transform the human being is from the heart, what he called the psychic. So from that point of the beginning of the ashram, Mother and Sri Aurobindo started to emphasize the awakening of the psychic in the heart. Now again, this has something to do with traditional yogas. In the traditional yogas, like in Ramana's path, the awakening of the soul in the heart is very important. And there's a whole thing that has to do with the mind and the inner being. But in any case, whatever it is, this awakening of the inner being is extremely basic and very important. It is on that basis that all the other realizations can occur. And this is where Sri Aurobindo has spoken about the triple transformation. The first is the psychic transformation. The second is the spiritual transformation, which has to do with the eternal self. This is more connected with the Supreme Brahma. And the third he calls the supramental transformation. And it is this step that is peculiar to his yoga. I mean, he said that the Vedic rishis knew about it. They knew about the supramental. But their aim was not to bring it down upon the earth. His aim is to bring it down upon the earth. But still, in the first stages of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, they're all the basic realizations of the old yogas. First, the awakening of the soul. Second, the realization of the Supreme Self, the spiritual transformation. And then on that basis, you can proceed to the third, the supramental. So, this relationship between the realizations of the old yogas and Sri Aurobindo's yoga is very clear. And Mother was also very clear. You cannot jump over the first two and suddenly go to the third. You have to follow a certain process. Now, there's another way. There's another way besides this. It's the way that Sri Aurobindo has described in the Mother, the book, where he talks about the three movements of his yoga. One is aspiration, rejection of everything that is incompatible with that aspiration, and surrender. Now, these are processes that are the essence. This is why he calls it the integral yoga. These three processes are the heart of the what you call the three basic yogas in India. Bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion; Jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge; Karma yoga, the yoga of works. At the heart of these three yogas are these three principles of aspiration, rejection, and surrender.
That composes sadhana of Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah, that is Sri Aurobindo's sadhana. But besides this, there is another, what you would call, it's a kind of awakening, I guess. It's a awakening to the experience of the Shakti, of the mother's force, which descends from above. Now, according to the traditional yogas, there are three forms of Kundalini, but one form they emphasize is the Kundalini at the base of the spine. This Kundalini goes up. The second Kundalini is the Kundalini that descends. This is the one that Sri Aurobindo emphasizes. It's called the descending force. And this form of Kundalini is originating above the head and it descends through the body. There is another form of Kundalini which Sri Aurobindo also emphasizes, and that is connected with the what he calls the psychic being in the heart. And it is a Kundalini that goes down and up. It has two movements. So these two Kundalinis are the ones that are emphasized in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, whereas the one from the base of the spine is the normal Kundalini that is emphasized by the traditional yogas of Tantra. But the traditional yogas also know about the other two. It's just that they don't emphasize it as much and they don't speak much about it. But it's very important because this is where Sri Aurobindo starts, or these other two forms of Kundalini. And in Sri Aurobindo's yoga, there are two things that are very important. One is the awakening of the heart center, of the psychic being. But the other one, which also can even happen prior to that, is the force of the Shakti that descends from above the head and starts to come down through the body. Now, this force is a conscious force which can guide you. I can say this from personal experience because I know for a fact it is that force that has brought me to India and to Mother and to Auroville. And it is that force that is the heart, the center of Auroville. That is why the Mother wanted the Mata Mandir, why it was so important, so essential for the Mata Mandir to be built first, is because the Mata Mandir was the receptacle of that force for Auroville. And it is what she called the cohesive force of Auroville. It is what will keep Auroville together and basically will save it whatever the difficulties may be. So the duty, you can say, the work of people in Auroville is to become conscious of that force and allow it to work in their lives to guide them. Otherwise, if that is not done, there's only confusion. People only get confused and misguided. So, and that force is there. It doesn't, how to say, people have to give their consent. That's all. You know, it's a question of receptivity more. It doesn't force it. You know, it's like the psychic. It doesn't force itself. It gives indication. It is your choice whether you don't want to follow it or not. But it is there. It is at the heart of Auroville. And it's in the heart of each person here. So it is up to each person whether they want to listen to that or not. And that is what will save Auroville. Not all the other things, politics and administration, organization, all these things, they're necessary, but they're not the heart of the thing.
So basically what you are saying is who is doing the yoga in Auroville is this force, and we have only to accept it,
Yes.
call for it, aspire for it,
Yes.
and that will do the work of the sadhana, that is the preparation of the adhara, of the vessel, and the
Yes.
necessary quality of
Absolutely.
development for the future Sri Aurobindo yoga realization.
Yes, absolutely.